Hi everyone, I'm Joe. Today it's time for me to do a book review of Child 44 written by Tom Rob Smith. This was first published in 2008. It is the first in a very loose trilogy based around the main character called Leo Davidov, and it is a fiction thriller set in Soviet Russia with some amazing world building, interesting characters, and overall it's a very impressive book. And for the record, they made a film of this only so many years ago now, which I have not watched for the record, but I've heard quite positive things about that film, and in time I will watch the movie and see, compare the two. So as far as a synopsis of the book goes, it is set in 1952 and 1953 Soviet Russia. This is the age of Stalin and the end of his reign, where he dominated so badly, post World War II. Russia is a harsh place to be at the time. It was not a cheerful place for the population as a whole. That is actually very much an understatement. It was a pretty miserable place, extremely so. And the main character is called Leo Davidov, as I mentioned, and he is an agent working for what is called the MGB, basically what then became the KGB, essentially the Russian Secret Service, essentially. And his job is essentially to enforce the will of the government upon the people. Now this is a communist Russia where the state is all powerful, all knowing and all controlling, and therefore the people need to abide by the ideas of the state. You get provided healthcare and food and all of the resources by the government and the state. However, you need to basically be happy with it. If you're not happy with it, then say you're happy with it, because essentially there can be no unhappiness, because if this is a universal state where everything is provided by one sector, you've got to be happy, because otherwise if individually you're not happy, then that means that you're saying that there's a problem with the system, and the system cannot be wrong. Stalin can't be wrong. So this is a brutal and harsh system which Leo has to cope with, and he has a job where he has to basically there are some mild crimes of sorts, but again, because this is Stalin Russia, this is a Russia where there can't be crime, because if there is crime, it means the system is broken, and the system can't be broken. So therefore, if somebody is trying to claim there's a crime, they're wrong, and they need to be dealt with, and if needs be, killed. Frankly, it is a brutal world they live in at the time, and not a nice one. Leo is happy enough in his job. Frankly, he doesn't always like some of the things he does, but he knows that he has to toe the line, so to speak. Otherwise the things that he's making other people do, and the enforcement he's doing on other people, will be inflicted upon him and his wife Reza. So he goes along with it. However, at the very start of the novel, something occurs, namely a murder of a child. And this may not be the only murder of a child in Russia at that time. There is fear that it may be more than one murder of a child, which is obviously horrific by itself. But of course, as far as the government is concerned, this cannot be a situation where it can't be a murder, because otherwise the system's broken. The system can't be broken, it's not possible, because if the system's broken, it reflects poorly on Stalin. So Lou is basically told that make sure that this is not a crime, because obviously it can't be. It must have been some horrible accident instead. He does start going along with this, and indeed talks to the family, and they basically go along with it because they know, frankly, the unpleasant situation that will occur if they don't. However, in time though, he starts investigating, which is a problem for everybody involved. The government and his superiors do not like it. They start being pretty harsh with Leo. He starts travelling to other parts of Russia to try to investigate what's going on. This leads to all sorts of complications because he should not be investigating an event that isn't a crime. At least isn't a crime as far as the government is concerned. But he knows it is ultimately, but he's conflicted because he wants to be a good officer in the service, but again, he doesn't want to just let people get away with crimes. He knows it is a crime. He feels it in his bones, so it's a conflict that he has to resolve, and he does by the end of the novel, but it's a brutal journey for him, harsh one. He has to endure some pretty harsh circumstances. His wife does, and indeed his parents, for instance, have to endure things, and everybody around him is getting either inflicting pain upon other people or having pain inflicted upon them. This is not a nice environment. It's harsh, it's brutal, and Leo is stuck in the middle of it, knowing that he wants to do right, but if he does right, this will have horrible negative consequences for the people that he cares about. So what does he do? Interesting contrast, and indeed dilemma that Leo has is fantastic, and I'm not going to say too much more about the plot, but it's a really interesting and complex plot with amazing atmospheric scenery and amazing characters, and that's what I'll talk about next, because the characters are great. Leo, as this sort of conflicted Russian officer, he wants to do good, but he also wants to toe the line, but you can't really do both, at least not without massive problems and frankly a certain amount of suffering. He's stuck in the middle of all this. His wife is also stuck in the middle of this as well. They do not have children as well, which doesn't help matters because this is post World War II, so having a child when you are a couple is frankly sort of almost required by the state, frankly. You shouldn't really be in a relationship with somebody unless you have children within a certain time frame. It's all for the state, help Russia become greater than it was. They haven't had a child, so this is problematic, and indeed it is discussed in the novel in an interesting way. So this is brutal and harsh on Razor as well, his wife, and also there's other major characters that come into play. His parents, Leo's parents, come into play as well. They are very honest, fair people, but they have been brought up in a Russia that is indeed as brutal as I've described, so they know and are used to towing the line. They know that Leo doesn't always want to, so it's interesting conflict there as well. So you got Leo having a conflict between what he wants to do. His parents know of Leo's conflict, but they have a conflict as well, because if you know somebody is not quite towing the line, you should report them in. Obviously he's their son, only son, so it's problematic. And another interesting character is Vasily, who is Leo's superior. He is a really interesting character, not superior by the way, colleague I should say, I misspoke then. And he's a very interesting character. He is very much a very ambitious Russian within the Secret Service, the MGB. He wants more positions of power. He will do pretty much anything it takes to get that position of power and influence, including betraying Leo if he has the opportunity. Leo knows this about him, so Leo is always trying to balance doing what he can to help people, but without it being enough that Vasily can frankly betray him and essentially get him killed and take over his job. So it's always an interesting conflict there, and their personality differences are also quite noticeable and really interesting to compare. And this is also heavily influenced by, and obviously entirely affected by, the world building of Soviet Russia in 1950s. This is obviously post World War II Russia. It's been devastated due to obviously the soldiers going to war in Russia. The country is hurting badly in numerous and almost endless ways. Stalin is still in charge, just about. It's the end of his reign as, sort of like the mighty Stalin, as he likes to think of himself. And this is an interesting environment to have a book set, because this is obviously, especially the part of Russia that's set in, this is a very cold part of Russia. It's harsh environment, brutal. The food is not bountiful by any means. It's pretty basic. The opportunities for leisure and fun are also pretty extremely limited. So this is not an enjoyable time for anybody to live. You can't go and travel, you can't enjoy yourself to any great degree, because if you enjoy yourself too much, frankly, you might have somebody accuse you of being, a non-communist and, not a Soviet. So there'll be a whole set of problems there. So it's a brutal and harsh environment. Tom Rob Smith, yes, while there are certainly details and certain elements that doesn't always feel perfectly correct. I mean, I'm not a history person, but even I felt that there's certain elements of the environment that didn't feel quite right. Overall, though, he does get it pretty well, a good feeling of it, even though it may not be accurate to the actual year itself. It does stay consistent within the novel as this harsh and brutal environment. Everybody is out for the state. They're trying to be looking after themselves, but what with the government and all, it's not really an option. So this is a brutal environment, and this leads to some really interesting questions and ideas that the novel delves into. The obvious main theme that it delves into is, of course, it explores communism and essentially what communism is, what it could be, and what it was at the time. It's an interesting exploration. It's not one that I am personally used to. Obviously, my usual fare of books is heavily science fiction and a certain amount of fantasy. Therefore, reading about Soviet Russia in the 1950s is unusual for me. However, obviously, I did do about some of this at school and such, so I do know a certain amount of information about it. And the overall feel of the book feels right. The issues it raises, from what I can tell from my fairly limited knowledge, I will admit, also it feels fairly accurate. It's exploring what is communism, what does it mean for the individual, what does it mean for the state, how does the individual and the state interact, what is both of their responsibilities, let's say, and their duties to each other, and how they connect. And also, is there any parts of communism that are beneficial or even positive? I mean, communism as a whole, especially obviously communism in Soviet Russia, is not a system that really works. It's near enough a completely broken system for the most part. But Tom Rob Smith does explore it thoroughly, and you get the impression that, indeed I've always thought this myself, that yes, I mean, overall communism is not something I'm for, and I don't like the idea of communism. But there are elements of it, very small elements, that in a sense are beneficial and could be used well. And indeed, that's another thing that Smith explores. He's exploring not just a case of this communist system of ruling people. He's actually exploring all types of government control, whether that is obviously democracy, as we have in many Western countries, obviously a dictatorship, fascist state, monarchy, or whatever else it happens to be. He's trying to explore all of them in a sense and say that yes, communism is this way in this novel, but all the other systems, none of them are perfect. Not one system, even democracy's got numerous flaws. Which one is better? Is there better? There actually isn't really. It's a case of, ideally, if you could, you would take selective parts out of each one and combine them and create essentially a new system. You're saying, would that be an option? Would that be beneficial? It's an interesting question that, as the reader, you will have to ask yourself. It's one that I've considered myself, and actually I do think that in some ways is actually quite accurate in a way. If you could take certain parts of different government control systems individually and combine them. You create a combined system that will work really well and more efficiently than many modern systems. But it's one of these questions where it's beyond my ability to make any judgment on this, because I do not know high government and the overall world control systems in place to that level. I can't make a judgment because I lack knowledge, but it still makes you think, at least question it to the best of your knowledge and the best of your ability, which is really interesting to think about, and frankly it's one that I really enjoyed. So overall, I'll say this is a really well written novel with a really interesting plot, great characters, a very interesting and atmospheric world, which is frankly phenomenal. I mean, Soviet Russia with the harshness and the brutal nature of what appears to be the people is a really interesting one, and one that I would be very happy to read about more in the future, which I will be, because there is actually a second and third book set with them as a main character. I mean, that said, that is it for my review. So if you have read this novel or you'd like to talk about it because you've got interesting thoughts, then please leave a comment. This could potentially lead to some interesting debate, so I'm always open for that. Any book suggestions you think I might like based on this, again please leave a comment. All my social media links can be found in the description box below, as they always are. And with that said, that is it for this review. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you another day. Bye for now.